Chapter 11. The Geometry of Shame. The truck's engine groaned, a guttural complaint, as it clawed up the mountain pass. Wind solidified from whisper to shove, driving hard pellets of snow against the armored glass. To the left, a sheer wall of black rock wept a glaze of ice. To the right, nothing, a precipitous drop into a chasm of churning gray mist. Spark's knuckles strained against the grime-polished wheel, the fur there matted with sweat. His usual jaunty whistling was gone, replaced by the tight, repetitive grind of his jaw. "Grip's holding," he said, forcing a casual note that the cramped cab immediately swallowed. "Told you the treads were decent. No problem." Jaron didn't answer. His gaze drifted from the abyss to the vibrating interior, then snagged on the rearview mirror. A shape on the flatbed, utterly still against the storm. Not Eve, just a form, a sculpture of gunmetal gray composite. His eyes, desperate for any distraction from the churning emptiness inside him, traced the clean angle of a jawline, the smooth, flawless curve where a neck met a shoulder pauldron. No thought, only the clean geometry of her. And somehow she knew. Her head turned. Jaron's head wrenched back towards the road, tendons screaming in his neck as he avoided her mirrored eyes by a fraction of a second. Scalding heat flooded his throat. Shame! He was caught. "Find a brothel at the next stop, Danos," the voice in his head sneered, venomous, "before you start molesting domestic appliances." He gripped the cold steel of his rifle until the stock dug into his thigh. Spark glanced over. The thunderous look on Jaron's face flattened the Wysokie's ears. Spirits! He's mad about that little skid, he thought, misreading the fury entirely. He hunched lower over the wheel. "Almost at the crest," he muttered to the windscreen. When they leveled out onto a wind-scoured plateau, the structure on top of a small hill resolved itself from the driving snow. Not a building, a wound in the landscape. A tower of black volcanic glass rose against the bruised sky, its surface pocked with blisters of convex, eye-like windows that stared with a blind, multifaceted gaze. From its peak, a crystalline spire pulsed with a faint, sickeningly organic light, unmistakably Chiron. Air stalled in Jaron's lungs. The low hum in his veins sharpened into a high-pitched whine of pure hatred. Every alien line of the architecture was a monument to the filth that had devoured his world, his family, his life. "Road's gone," Spark announced, his voice tight. He killed the engine, and the shudder of its death ran through Jaron's bones. He shoved the door open before the truck had fully settled, and stepped into the biting cold. The wind was a physical blow. "Out!" he barked, slamming his gauntlet against the flatbed's side. The sound was a flat, ugly clang in the screaming gale. Targan landed with a solid, graceless thud. Morral, however, vaulted over the side with a theatrical flourish, puffing his chest out for a dramatic landing. His boot came down on an unseen patch of black ice. A wet, definitive crack echoed in the thin air. The flourish dissolved into a choked yelp of agony as he crumpled, his massive form writhing in the snow. "My leg! Ouch! My leg!" Jaron's gauntlet clenched. He stared at the Vesk's pathetic thrashing, and for a half-second an ugly, satisfying impulse to kick the idiot pulsed through him. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the frozen air a-burn in his lungs. "Spark," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Go look at the moron." The Wysokie flinched but scrambled to obey. Eve landed with more precaution, her feet finding purchase where the Vesks had failed. She and Targan gathered around Morral, who was now cursing in a steady, pained monotone. "Walk it off," Targan grunted, prodding the injured limb without sympathy. "Not a fracture," Spark diagnosed, his tinkerer's curiosity overriding his fear as he manipulated the joint. "Ligaments are torn. Severe sprain." The diagnosis broke him. Jaron's control snapped. He refused to look at Eve, the sight of her now inextricably linked to his own weakness. He fixed his gaze on Targan instead. "Junk!" He spat the word, making it sharp and ugly. "Get him in the cab. He can watch the truck." He swept his arm toward the obsidian tower. "The rest of us will fetch the damned overgrown housefly. Targan, scout ahead. Move." The command struck Eve's processors like a physical blow. "Junk." high-priority verbal assault from Guest Commander Danos. Her logic circuits warred for 1/8 seconds. The imperative to correct the commander's clear emotional distress, clashing with the insult's targeted nature. Cascading error codes resolved into a single conclusion. Compliance was the most efficient path to restoring guest equilibrium. Silently, she bent and looped her arm under Moral's, effortlessly hoisting the groaning Vesk. As she helped the hopping giant toward the truck, her internal chronometer marked the precise duration of the commander's gaze on her back, 3.7 seconds longer than tactically necessary. She filed the data point. Her duty done, she turned and moved to catch up, a silent shadow against the snow. The path to the temple was a set of meandering stairs carved into the hill's spine, worn smooth by centuries of wind. They climbed in silence, 4 ghosts against the gray sky. The air grew thick, heavy. A pressure that had nothing to do with altitude pushed in on them. Whispers slithered at the edge of hearing, formless and cloying. The ghosts of spectral congregations watching from the obsidian tower. Creepy bastards! Jaren spat a glob of freezing saliva onto the stone. A sudden shriek of static from his helmet comms made him flinch. It was followed by a crash of metal on rock, and then a strange, undulating drone. A bass hum, painfully off-key. The squad froze. Targan swore at Vesk, a short, guttural curse hammered into his comlink. The drone cut off. He was singing. The Vesk growled, the words tight with a second-hand embarrassment that was almost comical. A moment later, Morol's voice boomed over the channel, petulant and frustrated. Bored! Jaren's patience, already worn to a razor's edge, snapped. Maintain radio silence, he bit out, a low whip-crack of command. Acknowledge. A subdued, yes, sir, was the reply. They moved on, the whispers returning to haunt Jaren. Targan slipped through a breach in a crumbling outer wall and found himself in a neglected garden, boxed in by a second, inner wall of decaying brick. Spark was at his heels, his smaller form nimble on the ice, and nearly tripped over the half-buried shape. An SDF soldier, frozen solid, his face a rictus of surprise beneath a dusting of snow. The others gathered. Eve knelt and began brushing the snow from the corpse with the detached efficiency of a groundskeeper clearing litter. Jaren retrieved the dog tag, its chain frozen to the man's collar. Tani Sabraze. The name was vaguely familiar. One of the team sent for the priest. Pincers, Spark reported, pointing with his rifle's muzzle at a series of deep, crescent-shaped punctures in the soldier's torso plate. The big ones. 2 more, Targan grunted, nodding toward the far corner where 2 other bodies were collapsed in a last, desperate stand. The grim ritual repeated itself. El Rodmich, Kathleen Penny. 3 men, swallowed by the mountain. Behind the inner wall, a series of suspicious, snow-covered mounds suggested they hadn't died alone. No surprises, Jaren said, his voice flat. He passed a fragmentation grenade to Targan. Clean it out. The Vesk pulled the pin and lobbed the explosive in a high arc. The blast was a satisfying, muffled whomp, showering them in dirty snow, ice, and small rocks. They peered over the wall. The snow was scoured away, revealing the mangled carapaces of the same ant-like burrowers from the fueling station. But the explosion had roused something else. From the temple's main gate, 2 winged hunters detached themselves from the shadows, launching into the air with an audible tearing sound. Corey! Targan roared, the word a familiar prelude to violence as he lowered his pike and charged through the inner gate. Spark's rifle was already up, the targeting reticle in his optical implant locking onto the Vesk's chosen opponent. A silent red needle of light pierced the thing's bloated abdomen. It faltered mid-air, trailing a spray of viscous fluid, but corrected its course, vectoring directly toward the charging Vesk. Eve moved for a clear line of fire, but the ground beneath the snow was a mirror of black ice. She went down hard, her rifle clattering against the frozen earth. Prone, her actuators momentarily overloaded, she saw Jaren moving, not advancing, but scrambling toward her. He became a shield of flesh and armor, placing his body between her and the second flyer. The second hunter had banked sharply, ignoring Targan. It extended 2 spindly arms, and a volley of bone-weight spikes hissed through the air. Jaren stood his ground, firing from the hip, wild, loud, defiant shots. The wounded hunter closed on Targan. As it did, something else lashed out from it. Not a physical attack, but a wave of psychic filth. A torrent of alien consciousness slammed into his mind. The crushing, suffocating weight of the hive. The horror of being a single, meaningless cell in a monstrous organism. The phantom sensation of the parasite from the station. The ooze filling his throat, his will dissolving, returned with agonizing intensity. His nerve didn't just break, it was shattered by a force he couldn't fight. He veered left in a sudden, graceless pivot, scrambling for the cover of the crumbling brick wall. Retreat! The word wasn't a command, it was a shriek of pure, soul-deep terror as he ran from an enemy that was already inside his head. Jaren spared the fleeing Vesk no glance. He just kept firing, walking backward slowly, making himself the larger threat. Spikes hammered the ground around him, and Eve, cracking the ice, none finding their mark. The fusillade gave Eve the second she needed. Bracing her rifle on the ice, she turned the frozen ground into a stable firing platform. At the same moment, Spark, seeing Targan's flight, shifted his aim. A murderous volley of coherent light erupted from 2 points, stitching a deadly pattern across the airborne horrors. Targan skidded past them, nearly losing his footing on the same patch of ice, and didn't stop. Under the combined relentless fire, the first hunter's wing shredded. It spun into the obsidian wall of the temple with a wet final crunch. The second shuddered as multiple beams cored its thorax, and it simply fell from the sky, a dead weight thudding into the snow. Jaren's rifle clicked empty. The violence ended so abruptly his mind couldn't keep pace, thoughts firing like misaligned pistons. It was a sound tactical decision, he told himself, the words, a frantic, silent mantra against the roar in his ears. Covering a downed asset while Spark reacquired a firing solution was the only logical move. It had nothing to do with her. Nothing. Slowly, Targan returned, his face a mask of raw bewilderment. His gaze darted between Jaren and Spark, silently pleading for an answer to a question he didn't understand himself. Spark broke the quiet, his voice laced with the cheerful venom that was his specialty. "Quite a display of Vesk tactical prowess," he chirped, cleaning a smudge from his rifle scope. "Is the sprained ankle a standard combat evasion maneuver? I hear it's reaching epidemic levels." Targan's eyes locked on the Isoki. His hand drifted to the thick, muscular base of his tail, his thumb stroking the ridged scales. Pure, reptilian menace. The Isoki's jaunty demeanor evaporated. He cleared his throat and found the inner workings of his rifle intensely fascinating. The crunch of their boots on icy ground was the only sound in the quiet aftermath of the outer court. Before them the Shurin temple loomed, a maw of polished obsidian carved into the gaping mandibles of some colossal insect. Smooth, alien glyphs flowed across its surface in tactile script. Friendship. Jaren's voice was dead air. He traced a symbol with a gloved finger. Community. Harmony. Spark glanced up from his scanner, his whiskers twitching. "You read, Shuran?" "I study the tongue of the thing I hunt." The words were chips of ice. Jaren turned from the Hisoki's flinch, his gaze falling on the inner doors, a seamless wall, devoid of handle or hinge. "Let's see," Spark muttered, tracing lines of energy beneath the obsidian skin with his multitool. He found a junction, pressed a nearly invisible glyph, and the doors split apart with a soft hiss. The hall beyond was the dissected interior of a beetle. On either side, elevated platforms rose, lined with benches and stylized Shurin statues carved from black, chitin-like wood, stark against bone-gray walls. A cold wind funneled down the central aisle, carrying a skiff of fresh snow toward a sacrosanct at the far end. The doors slid silently shut, sealing them in. Targan's heavy tread echoed confidently on the stone floor. 10 paces in, a sharp metallic clang broke the quiet. He leaped back, a Vesk curse erupting from him as a clutch of barbed metal spikes punched through the tiles where his foot had been. The points glistened, wet with some viscous yellow fluid. Sick bastards. Jaren's grip on his rifle whitened. Who booby-traps a place of worship? The kind that expect trouble, Targan grunted. He jabbed a thumb over his shoulder at Eve. Push the doll forward. Her plating should be good for more than decoration. She's not a minesweeper," Jaren snapped. "She's a tool. Use her." A muscle knotted in Jaren's jaw. The Vesk was right, in his brutal, simple way, but the order soured in his gut. "Fine. You two, watch the entrance. I'll find a path." With Sparks' laser pen in hand, Jaren knelt. The painstaking work began. Tile by tile, he traced the seams, testing the pressure at every edge. A thin, glowing red line marked the safe stones. Behind him, a silent shadow. Eve matched his every move, her steps precise on the path he carved from the darkness. Halfway down the hall, Jaren stopped. He tapped a tile with the butt of his rifle. A faint resonance, different. He leaned in, burning through the grout at the tile's edge with the laser. Acrid smoke coiled into the air. He rose, his knees popping. "Eve, that one! Put your weight on it!" He didn't look back. "Your reflexes are better, if I'm wrong." Silence. He glanced over his shoulder. Eve stood motionless, her expression serene, unreadable. And the truth slammed into him. The last safe tile was under his own boots. He was in her way. A scalding heat flooded his throat. Right. Stay still. He turned and inched back, the space impossibly tight. "Let me just—" He slid his arms under hers, gauntlets pressing into hard composite, and hoisted. She was unnervingly light, her form unresisting as he lifted her past him. Her hands found his shoulders for balance. Chest to chest, her face inches from his. The air sparked with her sterile scent of ozone and charged capacitors, and something softer, faintly human. Thought evaporated. Only shocking proximity remained. The solid, unyielding press of her body against his. A shape that was almost a woman's. Then she was on the other side. The weight was gone. Jaren's face burned. A brand of shame. This reaction. "Commander!" Eve's synthesized voice was calm, analytical. "Your circulatory and integumentary systems are indicating a stress response consistent with Class 3 combat engagement. Shall I signal Spark to take the lead to ensure optimal team dynamics?" "Just test the damn plate," he grunted, refusing to meet her gaze. Eve stepped onto the stone. It held. Jaren exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He tensed again as she turned and, without a word, wrapped her arms around his shoulders, her posture expectant. Another strained, clumsy lift reversed their positions. The moment he set her down, Jaren scrambled forward, desperate for distance, for the cold logic of the traps ahead. The episode was a ghost at his back, a toxic mix of shame and something older, more feral, that he refused to name. The last trap navigated. Eve's proximity still a prickling heat at his back, Jaren reached the far doors. He didn't look back. A sharp downward chop of his hand was all the command they needed. They compressed behind him, a knot of tense steel and adrenaline as he slapped the release glyph. The intricately carved doors slid apart without a whisper. The walls in the small chamber curved claustrophobically into a high dome. In the chamber's center, a Shirin hung in the air, multi-jointed limbs folded, rotating in a slow, hypnotic pirouette. Its iridescent compound eyes reflected the holographic swarm that swirled around it. Burrowers and hunters clawing silently, their forms dissolving just shy of its chitinous body. A low, insectal chant vibrated through the deck plates, a physical presence in Jaren's teeth. The connection undone by holy light. The connection undone by holy light. A mantra, a prayer. This filth meditated while his world burned. His knuckles cracked inside his gauntlet, the last thread of his restraint snapping. "Evac now." Jaren's voice cracked the sanctum silence as he stepped into the room. The floating Shirin arrested its slow rotation. It descended, its legs touching the floor with a delicate click, its multifaceted eyes fixed on Jaren. A voice like scraping stone filled the air. "The Forever Queen sent you. You are the shield. But I am the anchor. I will not abandon this holy mountain." "We're leaving," Jaren snarled. He advanced, his thumb flicking the safety off his sidearm. The movement was small, almost silent, but it was all the explanation he intended to give. His gaze settled on the delicate joint where the Shuren's head met its thorax. The Shuren's antennae drooped. The carapace on its back seemed to settle, its entire body compressing as if under a great weight. It registered the change in Jaren's posture, the finality in the click of his weapon. Desecration, it rasped, the sound of crushed glass. You would shatter the holy vessel. A pause. The mountain will not forgive this, but it must not be broken. I will follow. The final word was swallowed by a low thrum that vibrated up through the floor plates. Eve's head snapped toward the entrance, her sensors parsing the vibration a heartbeat before the others felt it. Incoming, her voice was flat. Vector, main hall, mass, significant. Before they could fully turn, the hall doors imploded. Shrapnel and stone dust erupted inward. Through the haze, a battering ram of slick, ichor-dripping chitin charged, a dark green beetle-like juggernaut that crushed the trap tiles under its unstoppable weight. Eve launched herself sideways without hesitation. The floor was a kill zone. She landed on an elevated platform with a quiet thud, rifle already shouldered, seeking a firing solution. Targan was the countercharge. A raw war cry as he lowered his pike, a green-scale blur of fury aimed at the heart of the juggernaut. But the juggernaut's underbelly cracked open, vomiting a torrent of skittering drones. The chittering tide flooded the hall, a wave of clicking mandibles and needle legs. The tide surged over Targan, his charge and his roar abruptly silenced under a blanket of writhing chitin. It washed over Spark next. His rifle spat red light into the seething mass, illuminating the nightmare for a half-second before he, too, vanished. Jaren backpedaled to the doorway, the ancient words of a Calaveran death rite on his lips. Targan exploded from the chitinous wave, screaming, his pike a whirlwind of impalement. He carved a space in the swarm before it dragged him down again. A muffled shot, then another, from the mass engulfing Spark. A terrified squeak followed. A small furred shape scrambled free, clawing its way toward Jaren. Spark. His rifle was backward, his face slick with terror. He fumbled with the weapon. Jaren grabbed his collar, hauling him back as the Waisoki nearly shot his own foot. Drones clung to him. Jaren slammed him against the wall, crushing two, and swatted a third from Spark's shoulder. Jaren turned back to the fight, the death rite dying on his lips as he raised his rifle. A piercing screech of static erupted in his helmet. Moral's voice, impossibly loud and cheerful, boomed through the comms. "This ankle is really bothering me. Can you ask the priest if he has something for the pain?" The question, so idiotic in the face of the carnage, was a hammer blow to Jaren's sanity. He ignored it. He and Spark opened fire, their combined beams scything through the swarm. Finally, Targan clawed his way free. He stood panting over the carrier's corpse, drenched in viscous hemolymph that steamed in the cold air. His pike was buried to the haft in its shattered chassis. He didn't look like a soldier. He was the carnage given form, a brutal heart of flesh and steel pulsing in the cold air.